talent. a vision to bring together innovators and thought leaders in the field of journalism. Over the years, it has become a vital space for thoughtful conversation on the issues that matter most to our industries. From technological advances to ethical dilemmas, the Seline Lecture invites us all to critically engage with the evolving landscape of journalism. This series is made possible by the generous endowment from the Seline family, members of whom are here today. The commitment they've made to the future of journalism has allowed us to continue this important tradition year after year, and we'd like to welcome one of them to the microphone this morning to say a few words on behalf of the Seline family. Please welcome Rex Seline.
You never get applause. Thanks, Rick. Appreciate it. First, let me ask a quick question in here. Raise your hands if, before you were made aware of this event, you had ever heard of Al or Kay Seline. Well, yeah, you guys. Yeah, you should do it. Get security on those folks and the ones in the news. It's not surprising if you haven't. There's no reason you would have heard of them unless you grew up in Omaha with me. Al and Kay were not part of the Money Elite. They didn't play football or volleyball for the Huskers. They didn't practice journalism or teach here. By most measures, they were just everyday Nebraskans. We celebrate them today for something else: their ideals, their values, their vision, their beliefs and commitments, their willingness to lead when needed and serve when asked. They believed in the value of education and the concept of lifelong learning. They were engaged with civic issues and current events. Perhaps more to the point, they were devoted to their kids, and they spent countless hours volunteering with our schools and outside activities. They were optimists with an understanding of history, but a focus on the future. Dad specifically encouraged his 3 kids to take high school journalism. He didn't expect any of us to become journalists, but he thought it was the best way to learn how to write and communicate, and those were skills he considered vital. He knew that to understand, and he also knew that to understand the world, we needed an understanding of how the news media reported on it. That's the spirit behind this event, as Rick hinted. And honestly, Mom and Dad would be a little embarrassed to have their names on this. They were not afraid to step into the spotlight, but they never sought it. At the same time, they'd be honored to be associated with our speakers today. As editor of the Nebraska Examiner, Aaron sits at the crossroads of civic awareness and civic engagement. If you believe in the role of the news media as public watchdogs, he has one of the most important jobs in the state. Jeff has risen steadily on the national stage. Now at CNN, he has the immense responsibility of serving the entire nation in these most challenging times. They hold important and prestigious jobs, yet they took time out to speak to you guys today. Dean Vail, the faculty and staff of this college, made that happen for you. And finally, if I can add one more important note, you'll surely learn something today from listening to these guys. I know I always have when I've come to these events. But if you take away nothing else, keep this in mind. My parents were typical Nebraskans, but with intelligence, dedication, and hard work, they made a difference, and we're celebrating that today. Look at these guys. Aaron is not a native Nebraskan, but he got here as fast as he could, and he was sitting in chairs like yours not so long ago, getting his graduate degree. Jeff did grow up here. He studied here just like you, and he worked as a Daily Nebraskan just like me. Today, they're making a difference on the state and national stages. Consider these role models. Soon it's going to be your turn, and yes, you too can make a difference. It's not out of reach even for everyday Nebraskans. Before you go out and conquer the world, listen to these guys today and be ready with questions. Thanks.
One housekeeping detail before we get to the introduction of our speakers. For the students that are in my media ethics class, the sign-up sheet is going around for attendance. Be sure you grab it. And at the end of the session, if you've not had a chance to sign up yet, our graduate assistant, Owen, will be over in this corner, so you can do that before you take off from the session today. Now my pleasure to introduce you to this year's Seline lecturers, Jeff Zeleny and Aaron Sanderford. Jeff serves as CNN's Chief National Affairs Correspondent, covering President Donald Trump and his new administration from the White House, as well as the influence and impact of their policies and politics across the country. He led the network's coverage of the 2024 campaign, his 7th presidential race, closely following the candidates and the issues, while listening to voters as he traveled extensively across the country. He reports for CNN's television, digital, and streaming platforms. Over the last decade at CNN, Jeff has covered the administration of Joe Biden, served as senior White House correspondent, joined the network in 2015 from ABC News, where he covered the Congress and national politics as senior Washington correspondent. Jeff started his journalism career at the Des Moines Register, covering courts, politics, and the state legislature. He's a 1996 graduate of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln and the College of Journalism and Mass Communications, where he was editor of the Daily Nebraskan and worked at the Associated Press and the Lincoln Journal-Star. He's a native of Exeter, Nebraska, and now lives in Washington. Aaron Sanderford serves as the editor-in-chief of the Nebraska Examiner. It's a nonprofit independent news source committed to providing news, scoops, and reports important to our state. Aaron has spent more than 25 years reporting, editing politics, crime, courts, government, and business for the Examiner, the Omaha World Herald, and the Lincoln Journal-Star. He was also an investigative reporter at KMTV, Omaha's CBS affiliate. Aaron received a Bachelor of Arts in Political Science from the University of Kentucky and recently became a COJMC alum, earning his Master of Arts in Professional Journalism in December of last year. Please welcome to the microphones Jeff Seline and Aaron Sanderford. Gentlemen.
Well, Rick, thank you very much, and to the Seline family, thank you very much for having Aaron and I here. And it's good to see Aaron again. We go back a little bit of a ways, but now our jobs are actually more entwined than you may think, and here's why. Yesterday I was at the White House, just another Wednesday. No day is typical in this administration, but in the late afternoon, the president had an announcement about tariffs, his latest announcement on tariffs. And suddenly, one of the first things that I'm thinking about, this is going to impact all of you. It's certainly going to impact all of the Nebraskans and readers. So Aaron, I think that's a good place for us to start. Virtually everything that this White House has done soon, even before the end of the day, becomes a local story.
That is honestly, Jeff, the most interesting thing about all of this. I don't know if you guys all know, the president has decided to put a tariff starting, I believe, next week on foreign cars and light trucks and parts for those vehicles. And as a person who is shopping for a soon-to-be 16-year-old's first car, I know that used car prices are going to rise. I know that parts prices are going to rise. And as someone who has long time driven a Honda, I know the cost of ownership just went up. and what I kept thinking about today was I was driving by, I think, Tal Anderson's dealership there on 27th Street, right off the interstate. And the first thing I thought of is, what about all those car dealers? What about all those auto shop workers? What about all those people whose livelihoods depend on all of those things? I mean, Chevys and Fords are made in Mexico and Canada too. And so all I kept thinking about was the ripple effects from Washington here are different than they were.
For sure, and it has been it's sort of always been the case, but I think in this administration it's been a little bit more, move this down a little bit here, it's been a little bit more obvious to track the just the connection between the national news and the local news. I think in a big way we've seen this, and it has been a real surprise to me, all the Department of Government Efficiency, all the work that Elon Musk and his team is doing. It is a local story here in Nebraska, obviously, but all across the country. So Aaron, let's start there. It seems that when these cuts come down, we've covered politics for a long time. Everyone loves the idea of shrinking government. Boy, that sounds great. But
I always talk about it.
Once it's known actually what is being shrunk or cut, it's sometimes a different story. So how has that been? How have you experienced that? How have your readers sort of experienced that? And have you been surprised at all by the programs that suddenly have a spotlight on them that we've never talked about before?
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's the first wave ones that in a place like Nebraska you'd know would have some reaction. The USDA facility on East Campus, was that going to be impacted? Curtis, some other places that have contracts with the feds. Anywhere that interfaces with agriculture, you knew that's someplace you're going to see pushback. But some interesting places, you and I were just talking about a Park Service building in Valentine. I mean, talk a little bit about that. I mean, you've heard from your sources about that.
It's been interesting because there's a Park Service office that's in Valentine that I believe the funding has now been restored to open it, but it was a cut. And I was hearing from just friends who work at the Department of Interior and other places that they were just getting an earful from some Nebraska members who were hearing from Nebraska constituents about why is this being closed. And I had never given that any thought, but you were saying the backstory of that building is it was actually not government funded at all initially.
Right, it was the community. Most folks, Flatwater Free Press, one of our nonprofits here in the state that does good work, they had done a little bit of a deep dive on this, but the history of that building, I'm old enough to remember, was that local community members had raised money and had converted an old sporting goods store in Valentine to an office for, I believe it was the Fish and Wildlife Service. I'd have to double check. I don't want to get that wrong. But they had offered this up as a community service to help with tourism in the town. If you don't know and you've never been to Valentine, if you're from the eastern part of the state, you need to get out there. It's beautiful. But they have some of the best access to canoeing, to rafting, to river activities, outdoor hiking that you can have in this state. And that building was kind of a front porch for a lot of those tourist efforts to try to get out into that area.
But suddenly it landed on one of the early Doge lists of things that represented savings. So that's an example of something that's on a spreadsheet in Washington, probably not that much money, but becomes a local story along the way. So that's been certainly interesting.
Yeah, and today, today you were talking about in the World Herald, the North Platte Telegraph was the one that reported that they've been restored now, that they see them back. And same thing in, like, there's an office in Scottsbluff that most folks hadn't thought about as a federal office that was important, but if you live in the Panhandle, it may sound close to be able to go to North Platte to get federal services. But if you live in the Panhandle and you don't have an office out in Scottsbluff or Gering, you're in the car 2 hours to get to the next closest option.
For sure. So one of the things, obviously, as we're covering, as both of us, I guess, are covering the second Trump administration, but I'm doing it at the White House most every day. A lot of people ask what's different. What is different about the presidency this time around? And in many ways, it is entirely different. And I think here's why. For the last 4 years, since the Trump administration and advisors have been not in the White House, they've been planning exactly for his return. It is a much more planned series of actions with executive orders and other things, but we are just now beginning to see this, the exercise of presidential power, the exercise of executive authority, certainly being attested by judges across the country, but also beginning to be, in some ways, questioned by some members of Congress as well. But it is entirely different in many respects because the president and people who are around him know exactly what they want to accomplish this time. So it's a different type of frenzied atmosphere, because there is a goal of trying to do all of these executive orders, immigration, et cetera, which is also a Nebraska story. So when Rick was reading my bio there, I was thinking, boy, every stop along the way was necessary to prepare me for this moment. My fights on campus that I had when I was at the Daily Nebraskan with Tom Osborne at the time, back when Nebraska had a winning football program, that sort of steeled my spine. And it's needed every day because it is it's a whirlwind.
Yeah, I think the part of this that none of us was ready for in any of this was a lot of our jobs changed during the pandemic. And a lot of the ways in which people interacted with their government changed too. We were talking about this. In 2020, you saw a whole bunch of emergency funding that was injected into the economy, injected into places like UNL, research, all sorts of things to try to spur growth and keep things okay. The weird runway and the part where none of us were kind of ready for was there was always going to be a moment when that spigot turned off or turned down. And now the difference in this administration, at least from our local coverage standpoint, is we just are not staffed at a level, none of the newspapers are, none of the television stations are, to be able to keep tabs on all of the spending going away all at once. It's the impacts are faster than people can keep up, and some of that is by design.
I think most of it is by design. The flood the zone mentality is absolutely by design. But if we step back a little bit before the election, obviously, as you all know, Nebraska was in the spotlight for the blue dot in Omaha. It was probably the most covered yard signs in all of the country, the blue dots. But I was happy to come out here and do the story. I think we were among the first. But Aaron, I have a question for you. What is the status of the winner take all? Because it was a big priority in the White House. It was a big, it was a frustration at the RNC that why hasn't Nebraska changed this alliance? So we're almost at the end of March. What's going to happen?
You never say never with the Nebraska legislature. They are all 49 independent operators. So I can't say no, that I know for sure. But right now it looks like they're 1 or 2 votes short. They do not have the 33 votes they would need on the Republican side, even though they have 33 Republicans, to be able to pass winner take all. And part of this is a little bit tied to how the administration acted last time. I mean, one of the things that a lot of folks didn't see, you did because obviously you were here, but the administration very directly engaged the legislature during the 2024 election to try to get that changed, because there was a lot of talk that they might need that one vote to be able to be president.
That 269 scenario didn't exactly pan out. But
right. In fact, I think this was I think the 2nd district in the Omaha area was the only swing area that the Harris campaign won.
Right. By like 13 points, I think.
Right. But I think they're 1 or 2 votes short, and it's interesting because they're trying to whip votes right now, and they're trying to, behind the scenes, figure out what it would take to move those votes. The reason I'm a little hesitant is I think everybody has something that they are interested in that might be of more value to them than that vote. The question is, they're on 2 tracks. They could let the public vote on a constitutional amendment or on a change, and then the other is a bill that would just end and switch to winner take all. I think the bill is dead. I think the constitutional amendment may have a path. The interesting thing is, I think it'd be a really interesting election and a lot different than people would than people would assume. I think a lot of people assume the 2nd district would vote overwhelmingly to keep the district level elections. The most interesting thing that I've heard is a growing groundswell in the 3rd district, in the most rural parts of our state. There's basically a Pac-Man shaped district in the western 2/3 of the state, and then north and southeastern Nebraska. That area is a little bit concerned long-term with the demographic shifts in the state. And as Omaha and Lincoln grow, they're worried that their vote might get washed out. And so there might be more votes to keep the district level system to allow the 3rd district to not be swamped by Omaha and Lincoln. So it's a little bit different than the dynamic. There's no guarantee how it would go.
Right. I think that is just one of the many, many, many fascinating examples of how all politics really is local. I mean, there is, I can't tell you how many times I was asked last fall, Nebraska's a red state. Why hasn't this changed? Well, it's just one of those quirky sort of things. But I think stepping back for a second, we both have had a variety of times in different media, different mediums, I guess. Talk about to the students out here, sort of how the changes in the journalism business have impacted how you report, how your news organization reports. And at the time when I was in college and when you came to Nebraska, the Nebraska Examiner didn't exist.
Right.
And now it is a leading light of journalism here. So how has that been?
Yeah, our little Politico on the Platte was just an idea. The idea was that the Associated Press and all of these news organizations that had cared about the Capitol but were running into financial hardship were needing to pull back on Capitol coverage. I mean, there was a day when the Kearney Hub had a Capitol reporter. There was a day when the North Platte Telegraph had someone that they contracted with at the university to cover the Capitol. And now what you see is the Associated Press has one reporter or two in the state of Nebraska, and they often have other assigned duties. They aren't covering the Capitol day to day. So someone had to fill in that breach. States Newsroom, the parent organization for the Nebraska Examiner, what they set out to do was to basically replace the State House coverage that all of us were losing, the political coverage that all of us were losing. Because in particular, the news deserts in our rural places and in our mid-sized cities, the Kearneys, the Scottsbluffs, the McCooks, the Benkelmans, those places still need good news about what the State House is doing. And so what we tried to set out to do was offer them a free service that they could run with crediting us, where their local daily, their local weekly, as in whatever condition it's in, they can run that for free without any having to pay the AP. And it's been a success, but when you ask about how things have changed, there's no part of our business that's not different now. All of you who are learning journalism, every single one of you are learning all sides of journalism all at once. When we were taught, I was taught with a pen and a notepad. I followed around people with cameras and video cameras, and every single one of us was specialized. What I've learned in the last, part of why I went back for my graduate degree again, even though I lost it the first time, was that I needed those skills, the broadcast skills that I hadn't learned the first time. Your multimedia approach makes you prepared for this moment better than any generation in journalism in history. And part of that is that you understand that people your age, people younger, are getting their news in 15-second bursts on social media. You understand how to boil it down better for people who aren't going to sit and read a full article or who might need to be enticed to do so. Part of what's changed in our business is the packaging and delivery. I mean, you've talked about this. Talk about how your job has changed. I mean, at CNN, you started in the broadcast side. Now what do you do?
I mean, it's been interesting. As I was walking through the union today, I was thinking of a person named Matt Woody. And Matt Woody went to college with me. I'm not even sure where he is now. But Matt would always be spending his time at the computer lab up here in the union, where there was actually one place to check your email. I know it's impossible to believe. And this was in the 90s. It's not, which I realize sounds ancient history to many of you. But and we were the first class of the Daily Nebraskan in 1993, I think, to put the newspaper online daily. And at that point, it seemed like such a revolutionary thing. But I had no idea at that point that we basically were joining a Studebaker factory. I mean, that the industry that we were joining was quickly going to be overtaken by technology. But I will say the fundamentals that you learn, the writing that you learn, just the absolute essentials of how to ask questions, how to report something fairly, all of that still applies. So we definitely have different technologies and things, but I wanted to be a newspaper reporter for as long as I can remember. And
You were a dang good one.
yeah, I mean, I grew up on a farm. I knew that farming was not, it was in my DNA, but it was not something that I was really equipped to do, so I wanted to be a reporter. But anyway, when you sort of like fast forward through our stages in life, I left the New York Times in 2013 because I was uncertain of its future, actually. I had a job offer at ABC, and I thought, the New York Times just the year before had furloughed employees because they were in a cash crunch. So every employee had to work or had to take off 2 weeks without pay. That was in 2012 during a presidential campaign. That was pre-Wordle. That was pre-New York Times Cooking. So you can see the changes in the industry that we couldn't have even imagined then. But that's when I went to ABC, and I've been at CNN ever since. But to get to your point, now I do as much of my time, I spend as much of my time writing long-form stories for digital. It's kind of all coming full circle. Yes, I'm on television a lot, but we also spend so much time because our first priority now is digital. If it's on your mobile phone or CNN.com, and it is the largest news website sort of for that reason. So more typing than talking is kind of the mantra. But the point is, we have no idea how the industry is going to evolve. So don't necessarily be locked into the technology, but I think learn about the ideas of storytelling, holding power to account, and things like that.
That was honestly the thing that I kept coming back to. I think when we were taught journalism, we were taught the medium was what mattered in a lot of ways as much as the story. You had to adapt to the medium. What you're being taught now is right. The medium is less relevant than the story. That it doesn't matter how you tell the story, just tell it well. and it's really a different animal now.
For sure. And one thing is that's also different is the instant feedback loop. Being a national reporter, we certainly hear it on X or Twitter or other things, but being the editor of the Nebraska Examiner, you often hear it face to face. So Aaron, if you could talk a bit about what this, the environment has become, where there's this 24/7 feedback loop where some people automatically think that we are the enemy. You know, I always say it's not our job to be the enemy, nor is it our job to be the resistance. But how is that sort of on a day-to-day level, and what kind of advice do you have for the thick skin that this job now requires?
You know, I'm grateful every day. I used to curse the idea that I grew up in a family with a college basketball coach. I have been screamed at every way that you can be screamed at. And honestly, I tell people this story and they laugh about it. I was in high school ROTC, and I wanted to go to West Point, and my sergeant major, God love him, he would yell and people would cry and I would laugh. And so I had to do a lot of pull-ups and a lot of running because I couldn't handle when people broke because they got yelled at. And the God's honest truth was, for dad, that was a Tuesday. You did well. That was pretty normal. And so the best thing I can tell you is that if you've ever played sports, if you've ever dealt with criticism in a theater environment, if you've ever gotten online and had a little sparring match with someone, then you're better prepared for this. You have to thicken your spine a little bit. I have had, and I'm not trying to scare you, I know you've probably had similar. My family has been threatened. My house has been vandalized. My cars have been vandalized. But the truth is, it's not one party or the other. It's not one side. It's not necessarily always political. In fact, the worst threats that I ever received were when I was a crime reporter. But the moment is different because of that instant feedback loop. When you write a story, it doesn't matter what you write. One side is going to be unhappy with it, or both. I honestly am not comfortable when everybody likes a story. So please just send me angry mail every once in a while if you think about it. This morning alone, we got called liberal activists and fascist conservative shills. And so I figure that's a good day. I mean,
Was that on the same story? Or
no, yeah, it was. That's the best part.
Right.
And so what we try to do is just tell the truth. And unfortunately, some people, it's hard to hear the truth.
Without a doubt. I mean, it certainly has become, this industry and this business and this moment that we're in, it often seems like we're referees. Never did I think I would stand on the north lawn of the White House in front of a TV camera, period, probably, but also saying, sort of fact-checking in real time. But I think what is important in this moment in time is that it is a moment in time. And the press, there's no question it's under assault. All institutions are under assault. And the Trump administration and the president has been very successful in doing that. So I think that, again, kind of our mantra is we're not the enemy, and we're not the resistance. I mean, there's so much good journalism that is being done out there. So I think that is kind of one thing that, this is what I was going to ask you. What makes you optimistic, and I guess what should make people optimistic about this business, aside from politics?
Yeah.
And there's a whole genre out there of things that don't involve federal funding or the president.
Yeah, it's a hard question to ask me after I just told them about the worst parts of the business.
I should have flipped that around.
Yeah, I am optimistic about this business because it's at a moment where 1,000 flowers bloom. Every single one of you in your pocket is holding a device that has access to every other person on the planet almost. And That is journalism at the micro level every single time you take out your phone and take a photo of a car wreck. It is journalism at the micro level every time you make a video and put it on TikTok and talk about the way you're reacting to something you saw on TV, to something you saw in your community. The ways in which journalism will continue to change and grow and be interesting. Look at the last 5 years. Did any of you think that there would be 45 sports sites covering the Huskers? I mean, I didn't know there were 45 sites that could spell Huskers. I mean, and this is in a rough time, so we're going to be better one of these days, and there'll be more. The local news environment, even though we're losing so many small newspapers, the local news environment is really, really going to sprout. Because there are still going to be local people like the documenters that work in Omaha, that work in Lincoln, that work in smaller communities, that go to those meetings that are no longer being covered by the local weekly. But the weekly would like to cover it, but they only have 1 or 2 reporters. And so there's going to be a bunch of new opportunities to cover news to make sure that we can still know what's going on in our community. What I see right now is a bunch of opportunities to catch corruption. Like, it doesn't matter whether you're Republican, Democrat, whatever you are politically. Every time journalism recedes, corruption thrives. So go find a good story. I mean, honestly, local government right now is so uncovered. County government, I mean, sports. Okay, we're talking about sports. Who's protecting the athletes from all of the NIL fraud? Who's protecting the universities from being misled about how things are going to go? Who's protecting, the folks that are on SNAP who rely on that benefit? I mean, this is what you can do every day, and it's pretty straightforward that your generation is going to change journalism for the better, and I just want you to care about it and try.
And so on that note, whoever has questions, be thinking about them. And then line up whenever, just in a few minutes here. But I think that is such a good point. The NIL, I mean, that is something that we also could not have fathomed when we were in college here, just the amount of money that is coursing through the system. So what a great uncovered, fertile opportunity, I think.
Yeah, well, and I was going to ask you, I mean, you've been, You've dealt with politics a long time. Obviously, right now in this moment, there are a lot of people. We had Bernie Sanders out here for the first stop on his tour. We've already had, the former vice presidential candidate, Tim Walz. A lot of people on, whether they're Republicans, Democrats, Independents, who are not in the current orbit of the current administration, are asking, what are Democrats doing? Like, what do you see out there in terms of the effort to organize any kind of pushback? Because, I mean, you've covered this. It's different than I've ever seen. There doesn't seem to be as organized a response.
There's no question, and that is one of the many different things of this Trump administration, this era, is that the first time around 8 years ago, the president unified Democrats. And now his action and his administration is dividing Democrats. I think what we're seeing now, and I was reading your story when Bernie Sanders was in Omaha a couple weeks ago and Tim Walz, and it struck me that the primary campaign that didn't happen last year and that was cut short in 2020 because of COVID, the primary campaign now is playing out. There is no real campaign, but the primary argument right now is playing out inside the Democratic Party. You know, it still reminds me of the old vestiges of in 2016 when the Clinton campaign and the Bernie Sanders campaign were just going toe to toe, throat to throat for months. That was never really resolved. It led to the Trump administration, which led to the Biden administration, which led back to the Trump administration. So everything is linked. But what we're seeing now, without a doubt, is the primary that was not resolved. This ideological fight for how to sort of go after the president and the policies of the administration. So we'll see how it unfolds and plays out. But it reminds me of in 2004 when George W. Bush was reelected by a narrow margin. I mean, he defeated John Kerry by some 70,000 votes, enough people who could have filled a stadium at the Ohio State University. And Ohio was the fulcrum of things. Now Ohio is not a swing state, so things change. But at that point, the Democratic Party was at its lowest level. There was infighting, the bench was very small. Well, then Senator Barack Obama, no one at that point in 2004 would have assumed that he would have been the next nominee. It sort of seems like it's obvious now. That was not the case at the time, certainly wasn't the case in Hillary Clinton's mind. So we do not know who the next leader of the Democratic Party will be, but there's an extraordinary bench of governors. So I love watching sort of the preseason, if you will. The Governor Westmore from Maryland.
They took away spring football, and now this is how you feel.
Exactly, I know. I have to have hobbies. Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer, obviously, Gavin Newsom in California. So I think what is sort of playing out in the Democratic Party is a fascinating sort of sub-story. So I think I'll go back to that around the midterms or after the midterms. But for now, there is so much happening, actually real things happening in Washington and across the country, the administration. It's kind of hard to focus on that. But I do think it's the primary that we did not see play out is sort of now playing out. But that reminds me of something. When I was here, there were actually Democrats here to cover.
Yeah.
Ben Nelson was the governor, was a senator, Bob Kerrey, obviously. And if you looked sort of down the middle of the country, North Dakota, 2 Democratic senators, South Dakota, a Democratic senator. Do you think that we are seeing a permanent realignment of the red and blue, or what states out there that you're familiar with that do you see some kind of counter to that narrative?
Yeah, I mean, I do think, and I'll ask you this question probably as a follow-up, the nationalization of our politics and kind of what we've talked about as the always-on cable news access to nationalized news has really kind of changed the political environment. I talked to Bob Kerrey, of all people, when he was back here trying to run for Senate, I believe, again. And what he talked about that was interesting was that when he traveled in rural Nebraska, it was different. In the old days in rural Nebraska, if you traveled and you weren't of the majority party, people would still kick tires on you and talk to you and, give you a chance to make the spiel. There was a different moment when he was talking about how as soon as they heard who he was and knew his party, it was over. There was no additional conversation, and that is a real. It's on both sides. The Dems won't listen to a Republican. The Republicans won't listen to a Dem, and it's really kind of opened avenues for candidates like Dan Osborne, who kind of come at it from a labor perspective or a different way that have a kind of new approach. There's a whole lot of people looking for a home. But the weirder part is, like, there are states where, completely red states like Kansas, Kentucky, that they're electing Democratic governors with huge legislative majorities for Republicans. And so there's some weird moments out there where there's still an opportunity. I think even Nebraska, honestly, is one of those states, because of its streak of prairie populism, you're always 1 or 2 third rails from electing someone of another party. And right now, kind of the big moment, you'll see it a little bit bubbling. I've always thought education, public education in rural places, was always that was the rail that could flip politics. It's a little like ag that way. In Kansas, that's what flipped that state. I mean, you saw it. The Brownback push to go after public education eventually caused a pushback. Same thing in Kentucky. The Republican governor of Kentucky at the time went after teachers. Well, in 120 counties, they still know their teachers. And so it's kind of an interesting moment, but there are limits.
I think that's right. And a question I get a lot is, will there ever be a serious third-party presidential candidate, a serious third-party challenge? I think we saw with Dan Osborne a very interesting approach. Wasn't quite successful, but certainly put the biggest scare into Senator Fisher's political career. But I do think we will see a third-party candidate. We, almost have seen it a few times. We were too young to cover Ross Perot firsthand, but certainly I remember, and he actually came to Lincoln and spoke. I don't know if it was in the Union, or I think it was like at Pershing Auditorium, which also doesn't exist anymore, but I believe that's where he spoke. Super interesting. I do think it will happen because of how the younger generations are not as tied to the political parties as their parents or grandparents or great-grandparents. So I do think that the idea of a third party or an independent candidate will definitely happen.
Well, what do you think is behind that nationalization of our politics, the change from being much more local where there could be a Senator Nelson to what we have now?
In some respects, I've spent a lot of time thinking about this, and a lot of people have different answers, but one of the interesting answers I think makes a decent amount of sense, just given my sort of life experience and where I grew up. Heidi Heitkamp was a one-term U.S. Senator from North Dakota, but she ran for Attorney General in the state, which I think she served 2 terms. And she tells the story about how she could see, like Bob Kerrey, could see the changing face of North Dakota as she was campaigning from cycle to cycle, and how Democrats were not being, it was not as hospitable of an environment because of the easier access to cable television. And she believes that you can sort of track there's always been a partisan split, but it has never been the nationalization of local politics, as we were talking earlier. Even like DEI is the subject of local races and things. So I just think the nationalization of politics, and look at talk radio, for example. This isn't a new phenomenon. Obviously, Rush Limbaugh was around for a very long time. However, it was just one piece of the diet. It was not the entire diet. If you listen to most drive time radio now, a lot of it is syndicated. A lot of it is national news. So I think you can draw a direct line between the challenges in the news business, the financial challenges, the erosion of that with the nationalization of news, because it's cheaper for radio stations. It's easy to get a cable television to hear some of those same voices. So I think that is one of the reasons.
One of the people that I talked to around the states that used to campaign for Democrats told me that DirecTV is what changed Nebraska. And that it was an interesting way to think about it. But it used to be that if you lived on a farm or a ranch, it was expensive to put up a satellite, to do satellite TV, and the cost of entry for local businesses, the cost of entry for local people everywhere in the state immediately got cheaper on those dishes, and so everybody had access all the time. How many times have you guys gone into a place and seen what was on TV and known exactly what you were walking into? I know we do it for Man and Woman on the Street reporting. When we're talking to someone, I try and look what they're playing on TV, and I know if it's MSNBC what I'm walking into, and I know if it's Fox News what I'm walking into.
For sure. I think what's interesting also, though, about this moment in time, if you look at the editorial page of the Wall Street Journal, the Rupert Murdoch-owned editorial page of the Wall Street Journal, they call things much more down the middle, obviously, than the programs on Fox News. Mm-hmm. And I think this scandal that's underway right now, if you want to think of it like that, which I think it is, with a conversation on a signal, the Wall Street Journal editorial page has been incredibly critical. Fox less so. However, the Laura Ingraham interview with Mike Walls the other night was one of the toughest, most interesting interviews, because she kept saying, that's interesting, but how did his number get in your phone? If you don't know Jeffrey Goldberg, how did his number get in your phone? So I think this moment will be a test. I think that this is something that every administration, every presidential administration, for all the planning, you are judged and guided by the unexpected things. And this is one of the unexpected things that no one could have imagined, that this conversation on a signal of all places would suddenly burst out in the open. I mean, it's a great story.
Oh, yeah.
On like every level but I think this will be, and the Trump response to it has been to obviously diminish it, take a familiar page out of the playbook, but it will be interesting. Like Dave Portnoy from a Barstool Sports.
Oh, yeah.
He came out yesterday and said that Mike Walls has to be fired. Mm-hmm. There has to be accountability. You can't run on sort of blaming the Biden administration for not being accountable after Afghanistan for no accountability. So I think we're at this interesting moment here to see where some of these sort of new players in the political realm are going to end up on this. I mean, I did not think that I would spend 6 minutes watching a Dave Portnoy video yesterday that he posted, but it was actually really interesting.
Yeah.
And he was saying, like, he loves President Trump, but he said on accountability, just none of this makes sense. And Joe Rogan has done a couple interesting things. So I think it's it's quite interesting that we are at what I think like day 65. So who knows how the movie will end?
I think my favorite part of that Signal story is the number of politicians that I got texts and calls from in the last 2 days.
On Signal?
Well, no, saying saying that they were deleting their way out of a bunch of Signal chats.
Right.
I mean, the number of people who use that app in government to try to get around public records laws is really obscenely high. Right. And it's kind of a first window for a lot of people into how many efforts there have been to avoid archiving that stuff.
For sure. Well, there's so much to talk about, obviously, about the business, about politics and other things, but we're also here to answer your questions. Students or other people in the community who have questions about the business or life, or if you should consider something else with your future, I would say no, this is where you should be in journalism. But step up to the mics if you're interested. Or I guess Rick has a mic.
Let's first of all thank Jeff and Aaron for this part of the discussion this morning. As Jeff has mentioned, we would like to take some time to see what's on your mind. We have a microphone over here. Christian, this is on, right? Okay. We'll have you come up to the microphone because we're also live streaming this, so we want to make sure all the folks that are on the live stream can hear your questions. So we'll let you start to gather at this mic if you have thoughts. While we're waiting for that, let me salt the water a bit by asking for some discussion about resource allocation, because you both have alluded to the flood the zone metaphor, or as Steve Bannon likes to call it, the muzzle velocity of just fire everything at once and keep the media and the loyal opposition constantly back on their heels. How does that change, and how does that affect your resource allocation and the number of things that you try to cover from your daily newscasts and web streams on CNN?
It's a great question. It's a daily challenge. It's an hourly challenge of priorities and triage, basically. You absolutely cannot cover everything at once. I mean, CNN has a lot of resources. We're lucky to have a lot, not as many as we did when I started 10 years ago, but still a lot. But the point is, that I think having priorities, we kind of start every day or every week with the priorities of what we believe should be covered, and connecting the dots of things that aren't being announced. Do we write about every executive order? No. The White House website is there for anyone to read through these endless executive orders, but we just basically triage our way through it. But again, like something like the Signal story comes up, that was not on our bingo card. That was not probably on Jeffrey Goldberg's either. They got the wrong Jeff. would have been happy to have that Signal. But no, it's a daily, the question of resources, it's financial resources, but also how much of your time and the sort of real estate of your websites or newscasts or things do you sort of give over to the administration, when people obviously, this is one other big difference, I think, the audience's reaction. There just is not the interest that was there 8 years ago. Many people are so frustrated they are tuning out. Other people are so excited that they're just watching OAN or something like the Trump aligned channel. So I think it is a daily question of you, like what's the balance of political news versus other things. But it is I'm not sure we strike the right balance every day, but it's a conversation every day.
Aaron, you alluded to the fact that you've got a smaller staff than organizations used to have. Mm-hmm. I got to tour some newsrooms over the summer, and you'd see empty cubicle after empty cubicle, and one or two people covering an entire beat now. Mm-hmm. How do you handle that?
It's interesting. It's kind of a two-part answer. Real quick on the national stuff, we see the same as you, the fatigue from people about it. We actually do a lot of data mining to try to look at what we are seeing from the reactions of our audience on our newsletter, on our daily interactions with people on our site, and we can see interactions go down if we post too much national. I mean, we can, if our newsletter is more than 2/3 national, we see engagement go down. because people are just overwhelmed. There's just too much. And so we have to try to scale and prioritize in much the same way print products used to have to do, or broadcast products used to have to do, where there's only so much mind share. And in terms of for resource allocation for us, I mean, we are small and nimble. I always jokingly call us a little pirate ship. we are not able to cover or replace what the Omaha World Herald used to do, or what the Journal Star still tries to do every day. What we can do is narrowly focus and try to be deeper, faster, and more interesting on a handful of things that maybe they wouldn't have got to. And what's really different about the business now for us is collaboration. Like when we started in the business, I would have literally accidentally kicked my competitor's cell phone underneath a bucket if it meant beating them. And now it's very different. Like I could call the Omaha World Herald or Flatwater and say, hey, there's this story that's more than what I can handle. Can we work together on that? And we would do that. And it's a different environment. I'm probably not like that yet in broadcast, but I know at the local level, I could call the North Platte Telegraph if we had a story in North Platte and say, Joan, could we work together on that? And she would do it in a heartbeat. And that's a really big change for a competitive industry, but we're just trying to be force multipliers. I always tell people more is more for all of us. We need more reporters, but in their absence, we have to work together or we're not going to get it done.
The microphone is available. Folks, come on down and line up as Rex is taking the lead here. Follow his lead. Go, sir.
I'm an old guy. You guys should be asking all the questions. I have 100 questions I'd love to ask these guys, and I probably will get a chance later. But come on down, guys. You're students. You need to the point you guys started out with, and what you're sort of addressing now. I get the national news fatigue. I'm there too. But almost everything you've talked about and where you started was all this stuff nationally is happening locally. So Aaron, I don't know what you did in college. If you were at the newspaper, Jeff, you were at the Daily Nebraska. You're looking at stuff going on in D.C. What stories would you tell your Daily Nebraska colleagues go out and do? I mean, wouldn't you have somebody looking into Signal? I mean, I don't know how much money has been cut from the University of Nebraska budget. I'm sure the Med Center has gotten a huge cut. How's that going to affect it? I mean, if I was a student, I was here, I would be looking at those, trying to localize those very, very critical stories. So put yourself in the role of the editor at the college newspaper again and tell me what stories you decide.
I mean, I think the ones that you mentioned about the federal funding, and I think also something that Aaron mentioned earlier, I'm obsessed with the NIL stuff. I mean, the amount it's just, I mean, it's not brand new, but it's new in terms of the last decade or so. I just think the money that is kicking around in there is fascinating. It's always challenging to interview student athletes, I know, but there have to be some student athletes who are being either taken. A graduate of this college, she works for ESPN, just has done some fantastic reporting in sports. And when you so much more to it. So I think that I would, if I was the Daily Nebraskan editor or working on a project or something, I think that's where I would train my attention, as well as on the federal funding. You talked about the Med Center and also the Water for Food project here, the funding for. See how Nebraska compares to some other red states with big academic institutions like Alabama, for example. I'm just struck by how similar the stories are when I look at front pages across the country. I had like one lane, I would go heavy on sports.
And yeah, for me, the one thing that I would be really interested in, it's actually two. I'd want to know what the impact is on first-generation college students of color who were recruited to the University of Nebraska, who were offered support services that are now being labeled DEI, that are being cut back or being rehomed in a different department. I'd like to know how that's impacting their college experience, how that's impacting retention rates, how that's impacting their experiences on campus. That's the sort of thing I'd love a student reporter to go dig into. I'd love to know, on the flip side, how different it is right now in this moment for conservative students, we wrote a lot. I mean, a lot of college papers wrote a lot about conservative students during the Biden administration and how they felt picked on. What's the flip side now? What's it like in those classes for Democrats? What's it like in those classes for conservatives? And how is it different? I kind of want to know how the political moment on campus is living out when it keeps touching the campus every day.
To Jeff's point, if you've not seen Paula Levine's article that ran over the weekend on the through line between the cuts in the Department of Education and all the things going on local campuses about NIL, Title IX, all those kinds of things, she does a really good job of connecting those dots. Noah, go ahead.
So my question is basically, we've talked a lot about budgeting, we talked a lot about finances. So in today's day and age when it comes to journalism, a lot of people don't really have those subscriptions to hard copy newspapers anymore. So as today we have someone from a very large company, someone from a state company, what are y'all doing to kind of figure out how to improve your budgets, to bring in more reporters, bring in more employees to tell more stories?
CNN right now is undergoing a subscription effort. It is imperative to the future. The amount of people who have cut the cord in terms of cable, it's extraordinary. Look in your own lives. How many people actually watch cable television? Even if you have a YouTube, it's just a fraction of that. So to replace that, there's a pretty ambitious subscription goal, and it's pretty nominal. I mean, like $3 a month or something, for endless stories, and they're trying obviously to get people to sort of the hook. But I remember thinking back to the New York Times, which was not a subscription model initially at all, and they started it with Times Plus. And Tom Friedman, Maureen Dowd, other sort of like must-reads were behind the paywall, and it was hugely controversial because people weren't reading them. Once upon a time, we thought, for the older people in the room, who would pay for a bottle of water? What an outrageous thing to pay for a bottle of water. Now it's like secondhand. So I do believe that there is a sense that, or the idea of like Apple Music or iTunes is going to kill the music industry. So hopefully we are at a time when people are willing to start investing and paying for quality information. It's a challenge, there's no doubt, but that is what CNN is definitely trying to do, as well as getting most of its revenue still from advertising on television, but that's not necessarily a sustainable. So moving toward a subscription model is what we're doing. We're starting to do. Like, it's only about 6 months into its origins.
Yeah, and for us, we kill what we eat. And I know that sounds a little weird, but we have to raise money from our readers and from people who are journalism interested. We work in a network of other states' newsrooms, but for us, we have a base level of funding that we raise every year to cover our overhead for our office in Lincoln and a handful of reporters. What I have to do is I have a goal this year. I have to go out and raise enough to fund a reporter for 3 years. We're going to grow this year if I have to go hunt the money myself. But we have to raise enough for 3 years to be able to get States Newsroom to sign off on us growing by a reporter. But to grow that, to get donors to be interested in that money, I have to sell them a plan. I have to say, this is what we would be able to do if we had that money. And part of what I want to be able to do for us is grow us to the point where we can start creating a positive feedback loop in a little ways like NPR, but without the government funding. We want you to be delighted. We want to be the place where you can share our news without worrying about a paywall. But we want the handful of folks who can afford to donate to give, the ones who can't, to just read and share. And some of that is just kind of building the culture of news is for everybody. But if you love news, we're going to have your help.
And it's absolutely, I think there's nothing wrong with just being very transparent about the fact that this is a business. Mm-hmm. Covering news is not free. When I was at the New York Times during the Iraq War in that era, which was very expensive, they started doing the style magazines 5 Sundays a year, I think, the glossy, thick magazines to pay for the war coverage. At that point, I don't think anyone would have even thought of Wordle or the cooking section of the New York Times is going to pay for the news. So I think the business side people, the ad side people, be entrepreneurial. We're not even thinking of ways that will actually like fund the news. But we should just be very clear. It's something that you have to pay for. Otherwise, you see what you get. The fake news, there actually is fake news. It's out there everywhere. And I think we have to be a discerning readers of that in terms of seeing what it is.
Strands is my new data go-to on the game site now.
Strands,
So if
okay.
you haven't tried it, you got to check it out. Dalton.
This is definitely a loaded question, but the Trump administration has shown to be pretty trigger happy when it comes to executive orders. A notable few being the removal of birthright citizenship to ID voter registration. These orders are or have currently been reviewed by the judiciary. Rhetoric with the Trump administration is heavily anti-judicial as far as I've seen. How do you think that the reluctance to accept judicial ruling will affect our current system of checks and balances?
It's the biggest question of our time. There's no doubt about it. This clash between the executive branch and the judicial branch will be the story, perhaps one of the most important things that comes from this administration. I think that the ultimate goal of the birthright citizenship is to have it end up in the Supreme Court. That's the point of so many of these executive orders. That's what Stephen Miller and many other advisors have spent the last 4 years doing, trying to look for specific laws and things that will be challenged by one court that will end up in the Supreme Court. But it'll be fascinating to see what the outcome is, because we do not know what even though it's a conservative majority Supreme Court, it also holds the possibility of surprising. Like yesterday, the ruling on a ghost guns was 7-2.
The Steve Wynn case they didn't take up on New York Times v. Sullivan.
Exactly. So I think, but to your point, it absolutely is going to be like, that's the end game or the through line of all of this, just the testing the power of the executive branch.
Kathy.
Hi, Jeff. Hi, Aaron.
Hi,
I'm happy to
Kathy.
say that I used to edit both of these guys. And sorry, Aaron, this question for Jeff. Absolutely. Some of us spend our days these days, and you know it because I text you, agonizing over the multiple assaults on the Constitution. And I write letters and I write letters and I call my elected representatives. And then I hear them on television or in a newspaper story say they support Trump and they support Doge. And they don't seem concerned about possible repercussions on Social Security or veterans or farmers. Jeff, do you think at some point Republican members of Congress are going to find the will to grow a spine and stand up for their constituents and for the Constitution?
We'll see. I mean, I think that, and I should be ready for this question because Kathy does, shortly after I do a live shot on something, I'll either hear from her or my mother, often at the same time. It's definitely a good question. There's no doubt that another difference of this Trump era, it is his Republican Party. It is like, there's no doubt that the House and the House for sure, the Senate, more than 8 years ago, is in his mold. I think that is going to be something that if Republicans or Democrats start to hear from constituents and see something that sort of endangers their political futures, I think that will change things. So my eyes are on the midterm elections. We are seeing some very interesting signs out there. It reminds me of the early stages of the summer of '09, when Rick Santelli of CNBC stood up and said, it's time for a Tea Party. And suddenly, there were town halls and rallies and things. So this was during the Affordable Care Act argument of the Obama administration. And there was a complete uprising, and it played out in the midterm elections. So I think that's the first time we'll be able to see specifically. And I guess the budget even before then. I mean, the president has said again and again he will not touch Medicare or Social Security or Medicaid. Well, the budget simply doesn't work without making adjustments to that. So we'll see how they reconcile the budget and his agenda. But as of now, I think without hearing from constituents, they probably won't. However, like I said earlier, the Adeva, Portnoy, and Barstool Sports and things, these people are not ideological necessarily. They elected Trump and wanted his disruption and things like that. But we'll see if there's a limit to the disruption or not. And keep texting.
Kim?
But as I said, you don't have to watch TV 24 hours a day. It's not good for anyone's health.
Jeff, earlier in your talk, you alluded to that this fire hose of EOs and everything, that they're very now more, God, to use it Graham Spanier word, planful about how they're working at things. And then you said towards their end goal. So spoil the movie. What's the end goal?
I think the end goal is what we were talking about a little bit ago, just the testing the power of the executive branch. I mean, I think in some respects, I was listening as I was driving to Lincoln this morning from Omaha to a podcast on the Daily, the New York Times' daily podcast. And my old friend and a colleague, Jim Rutenberg, was talking about how the Trump administration is essentially picking up where the Nixon administration left off in some respects. So I think the end goal is testing and flexing the power of the executive branch and the president's authority. Obviously, the end goal on many respects on immigration, we kind of know. But the end goal otherwise, like with Elon Musk and other things, I'm not sure what the end goal is. I assume that's another interesting storyline that I think neither one of us would have predicted a year ago, because he wasn't a Trump supporter a year ago. So I'm not sure we totally know the end goal of that, but I think the end goal of a lot of the executive orders are to get things to the Supreme Court and to have it litigated that way.
Yeah, it's a pre-Watergate presidency. I mean, that's what they're trying to get to, is all of the structures and all of the limits that were placed post-Watergate. They want those gone. They want to be back to the imperial presidency.
I just want to add that journalism is clearly the best major.
No doubt.
Mia, go for it.
My question is, where do you see journalism going in the future with social media, algorithms with social media, and self-serving bias that goes along with that?
Oh, goodness. This is the biggest challenge. I just had to hire for the first time in a while. And one of the things I would tell all of you is to be careful what you post, because the same things in our political life that people search our social media all the time to find hints of bias. And they will do the same to young people, to students, to people who are trying to get into the business. And I think fighting the algorithms on two folds. For students that want to be in journalism, watch what you post. For students who or for people who are consumers of social media, understand that you're being fed something slanted to your worldview. You are almost always seeing a version of reality that is tailored to engagement. They want you to stay longer. They make more money if you stay longer. And they have learned and coded, I mean, Elon has talked about this they have learned and coded that fear and anger and negative emotions keep you engaged longer. And so it doesn't matter if you're on the left or right, your feed is likely tailored in a way to make you fearful, dreaded, to dread things and to just try to keep you glued. You just almost have to, it's very much like what you talked about with TV. You have to limit your intake and understand. I've created multiple accounts that allow me to, and I've tried to like things that are up and down the spectrum to try to give me a worldview of what others are seeing. I've tried to create a conservative account, a liberal account, and kind of a down the middle account just to see what TikTok will feed me. And so it's just kind of a way to see a little bit of how we see the world different.
I'm Alan Vaughn, the general manager of the Daily Nebraskan. I want to say thanks to the Seline family and the college and dean for making this possible. It's so good to see so many Daily Nebraskan ties and alums in the room, especially current staffers who I also see. I really appreciate you all's insight and we're talking about some of the stories that maybe like we would go after that, and I all of a sudden felt compelled to run to the basement and grab a bunch of magazines because they address some of that, especially around DEI and NIL, and that was a lot of that was in the works before so much of the Trump administration news has landed on their doorstep. So anyway, if any of you know me, I'm nothing if not a shameless promoter. So I don't even really have a question. I just want to say thanks and say everyone grab a magazine on the way out. Thank you.
Thanks, Alan.
Thank you, Alan.
Bobby, go for it.
So this is more of a politics and sports question. In the recent days, Stephen A. Smith and LeBron James have been going at it on social media, and there are people that are wanting both Stephen A. and LeBron thinking they could run for president. Your case, how does that work? Because they both have been going at it. You both went earlier, and you're saying that like the Democrats are kind of going at each other. How can that like A, come together and they can fix what they have started, and B, do you think any of them are fit to run for president?
I mean, a celebrity would never be elected president, right?
Well,
I'm joking.
I mean, you can argue that Donald Trump was a celebrity.
I'm joking, yes, of course he was.
So-
But for The Apprentice, he would not have been elected and won the presidency. There's no doubt about it. Look, it's been fascinating to watch, and that is one of the other things I think about at this moment in time. It actually has sort of broadened the parameters of who's discussing politics and who is debating politics. So that's been an interesting conversation. LeBron James has been very active in Akron in his community. I mean, he's been very socially aware and has been very active from the beginning. I remember seeing him at some Hillary Clinton rallies in 2016 and whatnot. So we'll see if he ends up pursuing a public office. I think it's probably a bit of a high bar in terms of how serious he is about this. And Stephen A. Smith, I mean, he's a commentator, so I mean, he, you know, I'm not sure what his level of seriousness is to it, but I think this has awoken an entire, you know, from who's the, I'm blanking on the guy from Dallas, the Shark Tank. Mark Cuban, thank you. He also wants to run for president. So I think the Trump presidency and Trump being successful, even though when he got in and ran in 2015, I think, I mean, he has said that he did not think he was going to win. So I think it potentially will open the door to other people running, but it's, their conversation seems more Trump focused as opposed to what they would want to do kind of after this era. But just have to watch and see.
And then how did Stephen A. and LeBron fix the bind that they have? Because right now they've been going at it on social media. LeBron called Stephen A. this, Stephen A. said this about LeBron's son. How do they fix that?
I mean, Trump called Marco Rubio Little Marco, and he's his Secretary of State, right? So I think when one of them wins, the other one, you know, has to heel. So, yeah.
And you see her, I thought you were talking about Ronald Reagan when you said a celebrity will never be elected president. So that's
I mean, at least he was governor first.
how far back I go. So go ahead.
So a lot of us are from an ethics class, and what I wanted to ask about was the recent happenings of a reporter being added into a group chat, which we all know. So I wanted to ask the question of what would you guys do if you were given that information? Do you think they handled it the correct way?
I would screen record so fast you wouldn't even hit the button.
There was a funny response. A former colleague of mine wrote something. She's like, "Oh, Jeffrey Goldberg's a better person than me. I would have stayed in that group chat till 2029." But I think obviously he is basically insinuated this without saying so. I think he was advised by lawyers and things to get out. I mean, because obtaining classified information and holding classified information, even if you're not the one who distributed it, there are still many pitfalls from that and legalities and things. So I am very confident that they were advised by their lawyers to get out of that group chat. Because obviously he wanted to print something about it. I mean, so if you're just lurking for 4 years, then like when do you say, "Oh, hey guys, I'm here"? So I think he handled it as well as could be handled. I mean, we'll see how it goes. Like, we don't know the end of the story, but it was interesting this week when the White House And some people on the Hill said, no, there was something classified in there. Okay, well, he had the receipt, so he published them. But I think it also shows the restraint.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that David Sanger from the New York Times made this point the other day. If a news organization would have gone to the Pentagon with exactly that, and so we have this information that this attack is going to happen on March 15th, we're going to print this in the newspaper on March 15th, the Pentagon would say, no, no, no. You know, you have to withhold that for matters of national security. So there are things like that that happen quite a bit. I mean, so I think Jeffrey Goldberg used considerable restraint. Obviously, when you think about why is something classified, not just for the hell of it, it's classified because of pilots and the surveillance and things. Like, there are real people involved in these planning. So, I mean, we'll see what the after action is at the end of all this, but I think after 3 days in, I think he handled it pretty well. I don't know what you think, Derek.
Yeah, ethically, I think the key decision he had to make and that his editors had to make, or that his lawyers had to make, was waiting until after the operational time. Because they knew the timing of the attack, that's probably the thing where I think they made the right ethical choice. They didn't put the pilots' lives at risk. They didn't put the operation at risk.
We'd like to continue this, but unfortunately we are at our time limit. Let's thank again our two guests today, Jeff and Aaron. With a special thanks to the Seline family for their continued support to make this lecture series possible year after year. From all of us from the College of Journalism and Mass Communications, thank you. We'll see you again next spring.